Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar titled The Future of Real Love in the Virtual World, The Perfect Date. This webinar is a part of the ITU Digital Transformation Dialogues. My name is Yilin Zhao. I'm a Junior Communication Officer at International Telecommunication Union, ITU. It is my pleasure to be your Master of Ceremonies for this webinar. This webinar will explore the intersection of dating in the metaverse, discussing the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities in the evolving world of online relationship. ITU is pleased to organize this webinar together with the Metaverse Institute. Before we dive into the heart of our discussions, please take note of how the session will be run. All questions from the audience will be taken during the Q&A session after all presentations have been delivered. Participants can submit their questions by typing in the Q&A icon seen at the bottom of your screens. When submitting a question through the Q&A icon, kindly type first the name of the panelist to whom the question is addressed, followed by the question. Kindly note the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the event website. All the presentation materials will also be made available on the website after the webinar. So to begin today's webinar, Mr. Seizo Onoi, the Director of the ITU Telecommunication Standardization Bureau, kindly offers his opening remarks.
Colleagues and friends, it's my pleasure to send you my greetings. Dating in metaverse is certainly a new topic for ITU. It's a new topic for everyone, in fact. And this promises to be a highly informative webinar. ITU's Metaverse Focus Group is laying the groundwork for new ITU standards to support an open, inclusive metaverse that enriches daily life and makes valuable contributions to sustainable development. As tech users, we don't always see standards at work, but they are always supporting us. They are the almost invisible common thread that binds together our interconnected world. And standards may even be that invisible Cupid that helps people find love. Online dating has grown into an enormous industry, and the metaverse will bring exciting new dimensions to this already highly dynamic space. Standards will be essential for travel across different virtual worlds. They will also help keep us safe as we meet new people and form new relationships. Ultimately, standards will make a key contribution to trust in the metaverse, and we know that trust is the foundation of good relationships. I thank our co-organizer, the Metaverse Institute, and all our speakers and participants for bringing life and love to our discussions today. I wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Onoi-san, for these insightful remarks. They fit well into the presentations that we have up ahead. I would like to encourage the audience to type in any and all questions you have, and our panelists will do their best to answer them during the Q&A session. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists of this webinar. Without further delay, let us begin session 1 on connecting souls in virtual spaces, a unified experience. I would like to pass the floor to the moderator, Ms. Christina Yan Zhang, the CEO of the Metaverse Institute. Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's really a great pleasure to be moderating the panel session today. And welcome to the digital age, where a profound revolution has transformed how we connect and build relationships. Online dating platform and social media has become integral to the dating experience, introducing new and innovative channels to connect. In this era, technology has not only provided new ways to meet, but also have enriched and diversified the art of building meaningful relationships. In this session, we will have a close look at how the dating world may change in the metaverse. We will chat about the latest trends, opportunities, challenges of online dating. So if you have sufficient time, we will also have a question and answer session at the end. We have lots of interesting information to share with all of you here today. Without further delay, please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Madam Orabi, Executive Director of Technology and Innovation at Interpol. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Thank you, Christina. I'll request my slides to be played, but in the meanwhile, let me start. As all of you are aware, technology is changing at a very unprecedented pace. It is reshaping our world and our society in a very fundamental way. Metaverse, AI, quantum, drones, so many things are coming and changing the way we behave. But this is true for good actors, but also for the bad actors. And as the technology is evolving, we are also seeing how criminals can take advantage of these technologies. And it is important to understand how this will impact, especially the vulnerable societies like children. And we have to be conscious of the harms that it can cause. Next slide, please. This slide would deal with potential harms in the emerging technologies and platforms which are emerging. Although we have listed here metaverse, artificial intelligence, synthetic media, so many things there. I'll quickly refer to a paper which we released this month at World Economic Forum on the metaverse, and where we introduce the typology of meta crimes, the kinds of crimes which can happen in metaverse. There were many broad categories, including property crimes, financial crimes, cyber crimes, crime against children, identity crime, crime against public safety, intellectual property right crime. But let me focus in line with the topic of today's session, that is the crime in terms of sexual offenses and assault. What we have seen in terms of typology, these would include assaults, harassment, exploitation, indecent exposure, sexual harassment, child grooming, and all these kinds of crimes would be possible in metaverse. And when they get aided by the new technologies like synthetic media and AI, the scope of these crime increases tremendously. And what we are also seeing, that some cases have already been started getting reported. The issue, therefore, is, are we prepared to deal with this? Let me go to the next slide to talk more about this aspect. So the first issue which we are facing is in terms of the legal gaps. So we talk about the potential harms, but we are trying to apply the existing criminal codes, criminal procedures in the new technology forums. For example, in a virtual space, when we look at the traditional definitions of crimes, the question comes whether these definitions are applicable to the new age crimes or not, or the new age harms. Can these harms be actually technically be called as crimes? For example, we have been reading about the virtual rape and the virtual groping kind of offenses which may have happened in metaverse, or the potential harms which can happen there. Now, when this happens, if we try to apply the existing codes, the penal codes which are there, the issue comes that all these codes have an essential physical element in them. Now, in light of that, probably there's a need to address these gaps so that these harms can be uh, actually called as crimes, because they can cause a lot of harm, trauma and harm to the entity involved. Next slide, please. some of the challenges which we face in this regard in terms of the new age crimes include firstly the identity construct, especially in terms of who is the person behind this ID, behind this avatar, because the KYC norms, how far they are enforced in issuing these IDs. What about tracing who's responsible for this? So that issue of attribution to a actor who's doing a particular course of act is a very challenging aspect. Then the next challenge comes around the data management. If we have to investigate, then we have to look at where can we find the data for investigation. And this becomes a challenge because it may be spread across different geographical regions, across different stakeholders, and therefore very challenging to get. And they would be subject to different jurisdictional laws in terms of getting access to this data. So that is our challenge number two. The challenge number three is in terms of victim identification, especially in when the children are involved who may not report themselves. So that becomes a major challenge in terms of identifying who's the victim here. And then evidence identification, because if we have to collect the evidence and do the forensic analysis of that. But the question is, where is it available? That becomes a challenge to identify the locations of these evidence. And forensics in the era of synthetic media, where uh, many accused take the defense of that this is not them, but this is a deep fake. So those kind of issues which need to be defended in the court by the prosecution become a big challenge. So these are some of the challenges which are seen in terms of investigation of these cases. Now, our next slide deals with what is the role of Interpol. So Interpol basically is an organization with 196 member countries. So we are kind of a global voice for the law enforcement. So whenever these new technologies are involved, we are involved in looking at from, I would say, looking at in terms of anticipation of technologies, in terms of understanding the impact of these technologies on law enforcement, and then helping the law enforcement agencies in our member countries to be prepared to deal with that, whether it is in terms of harnessing the potential by law enforcement agencies or being prepared for the challenges being posed by the criminals around this. And also in terms of building the capacity of the law enforcement agencies to deal with this. But most importantly, it is also a global platform for sharing of information, sharing of best practices, and coordination in terms of how to take action against these global crimes. Because these non-jurisdictional crimes, they, they they need they need global coalitions, global efforts, and not territorial based responses, because they will not succeed. So Interpol provides a platform for facilitating these kind of responses to these new age crimes, and that is, I would say, the main role of Interpol. With this, I would pause here, and I'll be ready for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Maiden. This is really useful. So our next speaker, let me just have a look. Our next speaker is Dr. Douglas Vitko, Associate Professor in the College of Innovation and Technology at the University of Michigan Flint. He focuses on design for safety, autonomy, and prevention of harm through computer-mediated communication. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me just get my slides up here. All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here talking to you today. I'm going to be talking about the dating metaverse and why we need to be designing for consent in social VR and augmented reality as well. Just a content warning before I get started here that I will be discussing sexual violence. In a couple instances, I'll be discussing it in a lot of detail too. So to get us started, I think it's safe to say that most of us on this webinar right now are at least somewhat familiar with social VR applications, generally speaking. But what we've started to see in the past year to 2 years is the proliferation of what we would call the dating metaverse, or applications to support dating in VR. For example, we have the approach taken by an app like Planet Theta, where users can discover others within a VR world, go on VR dates, and then meet face-to-face. And then there's the other approach taken by applications like Flirtual and Never Met, where users use a mobile dating app first to discover other social VR users and then transition those interactions into VR for virtual dates and then face-to-face encounters. So these types of applications obviously hold a lot of benefit for romantic compatibility assessment and discovering potential romantic partners. But they also will expose users to a convergence of harms that have traditionally occurred through mobile dating apps. I'm thinking especially of physical sexual assault. And then also those harms that occur in more general social VR environments, like virtual groping and harassment that we've already heard about in the previous presentation. And so those kinds of questions have led my research lab to explore these two questions over the last 2 or 3 years. First, we're exploring what kind of harms should we be anticipating and seeking to prevent in the dating metaverse? And then how can the dating metaverse be designed to prevent those kinds of harms? And so the method that we've been employing over the last couple of years is something that we call participatory design, which are these multi-hour focus group sessions with users who have previously used dating apps and social VR to understand their past experiences with harm and safety in these platforms, and then using those as context to help them articulate their vision of how the dating metaverse could be designed to mitigate those harms. And so we provide them with arts and crafts and construction paper and Lego sets to help them construct these low fidelity prototypes to articulate their ideas that we then use as the basis for fully functional prototypes in Unreal Engine. So before getting into some of the design ideas that our participants have for mitigating harm in the dating metaverse, I think it's important to first specify that most of them reject the notion that there is any behavior in the dating metaverse that is objectively harmful, independent of context. Instead, they were understanding harm on a user-by-user basis as any action or behavior that occurs without the permission of the recipient. Some of them use the word consent quite deliberately here. And so we're defining harm in the dating metaverse as non-consensual behavior. Here are a few basic examples of that our participants brought up. Unwanted sexualized verbal dialogue, non-consensual observation of sexual interactions between other users in VR, and interactions that are agreed to under misinformed pretenses, such as misunderstanding the age of a sexual partner in VR. And so when participants were articulating how they think these non-consensual acts could be prevented in VR dating, they were pretty critical of features that are reactive in nature, meaning features that only are used after harm has occurred. These are features like blocking and reporting of perpetrators. Instead, most of their ideas were in the purview of what we call consent mechanics. These are features that are intended to support users in giving, receiving, and denying agreement to interpersonal behavior quite explicitly in dating in VR environments for dating, but also during face-to-face dates with the help of augmented reality glasses. And so there are two main reasons why we consider consent mechanics to have a lot of potential that are firmly rooted in many years of research in psychology and public health. One is that victims of sexual harm often have challenges with saying no to a sexual behavior that they don't want, and therefore also have challenges with reporting the perpetrator because they sometimes blame themselves for the experience. And then another is that sexual violence often occurs without conscious intent by the perpetrator to cause harm because they misunderstand their partner's agreement to a particular sexual activity. And so I'll give a couple examples of both of those from our research. So in terms of challenges with saying no and an opportunity really for technology to support that process, here's a story that one of our participants called Grace relayed to us about challenges with saying no to exchange of nude images with someone on a dating app. So she says, so I remember he said, you can send me a picture because your ones on your dating profile, they were old or whatever. So I sent him like a face shot. I'm in the library, so I can't really do much, right? I just take a selfie. He was like, no, I want a full body shot. So I was like, okay, whatever, it's fine. I'll just go into the bathroom, took a full body selfie in the mirror. He's like, well, I was hoping for more than that. I told him no indirectly. So it was kind of like, I don't know. And then going to the other case where we have people inadvertently perpetrating sexual harm or potentially perpetrating sexual harm because they're misunderstanding consent by their partner. And we saw this a lot with heterosexual men in our research, where they would interpret seemingly innocuous signals in a dating app as solid evidence that their partner has already consented to a sexual activity before ever meeting them face to face. And so in this example from one of our participants called Ethan, he says, during messaging on the dating app, she was like, yeah, I was a Catholic schoolgirl. She gave me a winky face emoji. It's like, all right, yeah, I know what she's trying to do here. I was really hoping for sex, which was a lot, which like, okay, here, a guy doesn't drive over an hour and leave empty-handed. And so what we see in this example is this participant, Ethan, went on a face-to-face date with another Tinder user with the explicit understanding that sex was already agreed to, and they therefore told us that they didn't bother to ask for permission before touching them because they thought they had already received that permission. And so with that as a backdrop, I'll briefly go over some of the high-level concepts for consent mechanics and VR dating that our participants were excited about. A lot of them pertained to tools to scaffold the asking for and giving of consent to entering personal space or to touch of one's physical body or avatar in VR or in augmented reality. And so this was seen as a repurposing of the personal space bubble that we commonly see in social VR environments today, but they wanted to modify it into what some called a consent bubble, meaning when someone gets close to your personal space, it prompts a explicit consent exchange where the person who owns that personal space has to explicitly agree to their partner traversing into that space or touching their virtual or physical body. Another set of examples was commonly around what we call environmental consent. These would be tools that inform users' consent to observation of other people and their potentially sexual interactions in VR dating spaces. So for example, if a user is debating whether to join a VR nightclub or a VR bar in the dating metaverse, they can see a preview of the types of behaviors that are currently occurring in that space to make an informed decision to consent to entering that world and potentially observing some of that behavior. So in terms of next steps that we're engaging in at University of Michigan Flint with my student researchers, so we're currently in the midst of developing and testing fully functional consent mechanics in Unreal Engine. And we would involve users of diverse gender and sexual identities to assess the usability of these tools, but probably most importantly, their willingness to actually use them in everyday interactions. And then from there, we would deploy consent mechanics in AR to VR interactions to study their influence on behavior and their potential to mitigate adverse impact and sexual harm. So that's all I have for you today. I just want to say thank you to the National Science Foundation in the United States for funding my team's research. I know I only spoke for about 10 minutes today, but if you're interested in learning more about the things I covered, I would recommend these two papers for further reading on some of the work we're doing around consent mechanics in VR and AR. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor. I think your research, especially the outcome of that, will be very important to secure the future, dating opportunities in the metaverse in a really safe and, pleasant environment. So our next speaker is Laura Matter, and she's a co-founder of Noi. So in February 2022, Laura and two co-founders founded Noi, a video-based speed dating platform that combines psychological know-how with AI algorithm and seems to be in tune with the times. So Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here and talk a little bit about what we are doing. So yeah, like you already said, I co-founded a dating platform, which is called Noi. And we are a live video dating platform. It works like a speed dating that you probably know from a bar or a restaurant, old school thing, and then still going on, and we bring it to the online dating world. So basically it's 2 times a week, Sunday and Monday at 8 p.m. and then you log in and you have up to 7 dates for 6 minutes. And what we tried to solve when we founded the company and still trying to solve is actually not, it made the first glimpse you would thought it's okay, where's dating going? It's probably going from like texting more into video, like that's kind of future thing, and then going into metaverse like this. In my head, at least, that was kind of like would be a logical process. But what we actually tried to do with the video dating is bringing more people back to real life dates, because what we saw is that on the dating apps right now, on swiping platforms, one problem is that a lot of people, they don't end up on a real date. So only 2% of all the matches on Tinder, for example, they end up in a real date. So we have a lot of matches, a high frequency of profiles that we're going to swipe, but ending up in a real date is not that high of a chance. And that's actually the real thing, with the real USP of our platform, that we see that if you meet in a video dating for the first time, like that's your first impression, and then you match after that, then there's like a much higher chance of meeting in real life. In numbers, 78% of our matches, they end up in a real date in the real world. And it makes sense because you get a much more authentic impression of someone than just seeing the profile and pictures and chatting to each other. You can actually have a conversation, which is live. So you have a live conversation, and it's not like the time frequency is like I'm texting you now and then you text me back in a few hours. So you have a conversation, you hear the voice and see gesture and mimic and all that kind of stuff. So actually what we're really doing is bringing people back to real dates in the real world more often. We bring back authenticity and efficiency. So you like get a more deep and authentic impression of someone in a quick time frame. So only in a few minutes you can decide, or you can much easier decide if you want to meet someone in real life or not. And it gives you more like structure to someone's personality. And that's a real thing, that we're cutting out the whole swiping, we're cutting out the whole chatting, and we are only focusing on video dates, and you have to participate in the video date in order to use our platform. There are kind of 2 ways where we are heading at the moment, and that's the main topic that I wanted to touch on today as well, is that we founded the company 2 years ago. We're a much early stage startup, and we're just trying to figure out the whole dating world and see where our place is. And there are kind of 2 ways at the moment where I'm sharing my thoughts on, and also there's not like a specific road that we took already. So one thing is, on one hand, we're focusing on gamification in the video dates, and gamification is kind of turned into a bit of a bad word, or people don't like it, but it's actually in a positive way. Like you can improve a conversation as a platform. So what we are trying to do on a higher level, like we say, how can we improve a video date, like one of those speed datings, to have the best 6 minutes of your life, or at least for that dating experience. And in that, you can actually use data and use gamification in a super cool way. So to put it like that, most people are not that good in small talk. And if we're just going to bring 2 people together, they're going to talk about their jobs and what they're doing in their leisure time, maybe, I don't know, age, where they're living, and that's it. We're gonna talk about the same topics all over again with all those people, because that's also what we're doing on dating apps right now. Like, we're chatting about the same topics all the time, because we feel like that's a good way to do the small talks, and it is. But the thing is, as a platform, you can influence that in a positive way, because we know, for example, what we saw very quickly is, like, if you have something in common that is very specific, there is a special bond that you can take to two people in the very first minutes. So, for example, I know in a date that two people spent, as a child, they spent their holidays always in Egypt, for example. And they were like diving there, and they have a whole passion for diving. Like, I know these things as a platform because they type it in their profile, but as a person, in the first 6 minutes of meeting someone, you would never bring up those like very specific topics. And as a platform, we can influence that and like give people the information that they may need or want to actually have super interesting 6 minutes with every person and have different conversations and not the same small talk all over again. So we're trying in one direction, really like trying to expand the video dating, trying to influence the conversations that people have, also make it gamification, as like you can do a game during the video date, stuff like that, which maybe goes more into the creative part also of metaverse, like what is possible as on a technology side. And then there is another thing that is coming up at the moment that we're also as a company focusing on, which is completely different, and that is offline events, like real offline events where people meet in a bar. So this may sound a bit weird, like, I thought you're doing video dates. We're actually focusing on both parts. So both are very important parts of our business. And overall, our mission is always to bring people back to real life as quick as possible. And that's not just something that we would like to see in the world, but offline events at the moment, they're super popular. Not only in Switzerland, in American, we can see it in the UK. There is the kind of momentum at the moment. I don't know if it is from the COVID times that people are seeking those kinds of conversations and connections again, actually meeting in real life. And it doesn't have to be an opposite. Like, maybe we live in a dating world where it's all connected and it's a combination of metaverse and offline dates and everything. But what it is a fact that at the moment, there is all this technology, like innovation and stuff, cool stuff that we can do with technology, but at the same time, people are seeking the complete opposite and be like, hey, maybe I just go in a bar and I want to meet people there. So I find it at the moment, it's a super interesting time in the dating scene. So some thoughts on that, maybe to wrap it up, what I just talked about is, I do think that in the future, online dating will much more become an experience, like a positive experience. I find it fascinating that we're still like on dating apps. It's all over the same thing of like, hey, what you doing? What are you doing for a job? And we're just repeating what we are texting someone 100 times. So I do think that it's much more going to be like a personal experience for everyone. And it's all about, it will always be about community and like, where's the mass going? Like, also with the live video dating, we are, at the moment, we can't say if this is going to be a new way of dating. We just started out and it's going great, but like, we will never know. Maybe in 5 years, we will say no one wants to video date. No one wants to do that. So I do think sometimes it's not the logical thing that may be next, or even metaverse dating may be a logical next step, but it is not sure if the mass and the community is actually going to use it at the moment already. I do think matching is going to be like much more deep, that we can actually see based on data. We can match people much more personalized. This is not something that we are doing at the moment, but I do think it's going in that direction in the future. Use personal data useful, like I said, like that's a positive thing. As a platform, you have all this data, so you can influence the experience for everyone using the platform. Psychological safety is going to be a huge one, which Douglas already talked about much more in detail. That's going to be a huge thing also for us. Like, how can we prevent the whole misuse of platforms, because the technology is so fast in development? That's going to be a huge challenge. I don't have like a solution on that, but I do think as us as a dating platform, all the dating platform, that's one big challenge of like, how can we make this whole space more safe, and how can we make it psychological safer, that people want also to be open and transparent and authentic in the online dating world. And AI, of course, also in dating, maybe a very big part of it. And I do think that it's more going to be like a moral thing of how much do we want AI to be part of it, because there is a whole question of like, do we actually need the personal one-to-one connections as people, or can also AI maybe displace it? Because, and that's the thing that I'm, maybe to wrap it up, want to touch on is that I do think at the moment it is split apart. Like, there is a huge part of like going for the technology, metaverse, AI, maybe we don't even need the personal connections anymore. Maybe it is fine if we're just going to chat with an AI person, or person with an AI bot. And on the other hand, it's the complete opposite, where people actually seek the offline world much more than ever. So I think it's a very interesting time to be in the dating scene. That's it. That's about it. Thought maybe there's some brain food for everyone.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Could all the speakers turn on your cameras now? Wonderful. Let's have some discussions. So Laura, let me go to you first. What's your target audience, and do you see any reasons why that specific age group, for example, is really interested in video dating?
Our age group is around 25 to 45 at the moment. And I don't know, as the young generation is not really into phoning and it's like a lot about chatting. So I do think that that's also maybe the reason why we're not very strong in like 18 to 25-year-old, but like millennials and 35 plus is very much our target group. It is, I mean, we have a lot of singles that say, okay, I've been on the swiping dating apps now for like 1 or 2 years. And it's kind of like, it's a bit frustrating and it needs a lot of time, and I'm kind of done with them. But I don't want to go to like complete matchmaking agency where it all feels like a huge pressure of like, okay, I need to get married tomorrow. So we're kind of in between those two worlds.
Interesting. So Douglas, are the consent mechanisms you have been developing only usable in virtual reality, or could they be used in other settings or with other technologies related to dating?
Oh, thank you for the question. They can be used with a variety of emerging technologies. So what I presented today was around VR and AR, but some of the other opportunities that we're actually currently developing for are messaging interfaces within traditional dating apps to scaffold consent to, for example, exchange of nude images, and then also wearable technologies during face-to-face dates like watches, and also some basic forms of social robotics.
Interesting. So, Madam, for the law enforcement perspective, what is the biggest challenge posed by new and emerging technologies?
Thank you, Christina. I would say that new and emerging technologies have, in a sense, totally disrupted the traditional police business models. So, if you are aware of how police works, there were basically two traditional models. One was that we used to go to scene of crime from there we used to pick up some pieces of evidence and then piece them together to attribute it to a criminal. That was one. And the second one, which was we used to call as follow the money. Who's the beneficiary of this crime, and try to track them. The new and emerging technology, first of all, when we say scene of crime, what is the scene of crime? Maybe it is distributed over many geographical jurisdictions, or maybe just a virtual scene of crime. So it becomes very difficult to gather those pieces of evidence and then attribute them to a criminal. So that model has been disrupted. Second one is in terms of the follow the money with the asset, with the most of the assets going virtual these days, with cryptocurrencies and all those things going, mixers and laundering becoming a service offered at various kind of darknet markets. So even that model is failing. So basically we are now looking at intelligence led global coalitions which can tackle this. And when we come, this was in a more generic sense, but when we come to the metaverse per se, our problems are in terms of the legal gaps, as I was mentioning. For example, what are avatars? How do we treat avatars? Are they an extension of human entities? Are they symbolic representations of human entities? Or are they properties of human entities? So, for example, if we treat them as properties of human entities, then there's no rape. It is just a damage to property. But if we treat them as extension of human entities, then the scenario changes totally. So we do not know how to define avatars in the legal terms, and that is making our challenges much more difficult to surmount. And then traditional issues, which I had already mentioned in terms of the identity construct, in terms of the distribution of evidence across the globe, in terms of piecing them together, those are the other challenges which we are facing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So how do you see the role of Interpol in those domains? Because there seems to be lots of gaps need to be filled.
Absolutely. So when the gaps are global, so our first role is, if you look at our vision statement, it is connecting police for a safer world. So what we are trying to do is that in connecting the police forces in terms of exchange of best practices, in terms of exchange of intelligence, in terms of exchange of information, and real life global coordination of operations. Second role is we look at the new and emerging technologies from a three-dimensional paradigm. How can we benefit? As what are the opportunities for us? What are the challenges posed by these crimes in terms of how they are being exploited by criminals? And thirdly is that if a crime happens, for example, let's take the metaverse. How can we use metaverse? How can criminals use, and how they are going to commit crimes? But the third dimension is that if a crime happens in metaverse or through metaverse, how do we do investigation? How do we do forensic analysis? What are the data points which we need to collect? Will we collect the data from haptic devices? Will we collect data from VR devices? Will we collect data from the metaverse service providers? Where will we get the data to attribute and identify the criminal? So these are the basic issues on which we are working and helping our member countries to build the capacity that in case they are faced with a crime which is happening or in or through metaverse, then they are able to tackle that. And we are trying to do it in all the new and emerging technologies, and we have looked at numerous technologies and developing our guidance for our member countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Douglas, improving abilities to ask for and give consent through technology may not stop bad actors who intentionally want to cause harm. So how should we deal with those types of harms in virtual dating?
Thanks for the question. This actually connects with a few different questions that are in the Q&A addressed to me around criminals of online sexual violence in VR dating. And so I can kind of answer some of those questions while answering that one at the same time. So one of the first things I want to clarify is that sexual violence is one of the most underreported crimes on the planet. And there are a variety of reasons why that is, but the point I'm bringing that up is questions around laws for prosecuting criminals of virtual sexual violence cannot be effective if the crimes are not being reported. And so we need to consider why those crimes are not being reported and how we can address those reasons. And so I'll give another anecdote to demonstrate why these types of crimes are very seldom reported, whether it's in VR or even in the real world. So we had one woman who used dating apps who reported to us that she was getting sexually harassing messages from a man on the app, very, very graphic messages, as well as nude imagery. She told us that she apologized to that man after receiving those messages. She apologized to him because she told us that her understanding of dating apps like Tinder is that they're for sex. And because she was there looking for friendship first, it's her fault that she received those messages, because she should have known that men were expecting sexual favors, and by declining them, she was doing something wrong. Now, of course, we can all say that doesn't make sense, but to users, it does. And so when considering how do we update laws, we also need to consider how do we update technology and perceptions of people to recognize the experiences they're having as wrong and sometimes as criminal offenses. And so that's the first thing that I would say about how do we deal with some of these harms from a legal or criminal standpoint. One of the main reasons we're pursuing consent mechanics is through this acknowledgement that sexual violence often occurs sometimes without realization by the victim that experience is wrong or sometimes criminal, and also because it often occurs without conscious intent to cause harm from the side of the perpetrator. I already gave an example of that in my presentation, and there are many, many others. And so to one of the questions in the Q&A around how do we conduct data collection from criminals? How do we get them to describe to us these experiences in such graphic detail? Well, we actually spent several months consulting sexual violence experts, sexual assault nurse examiners to understand, well, how do they interact with perpetrators and victims of sexual harm? And then how should we be doing that? And the most important thing is we don't use words like criminal or sexual assault or victim or perpetrator, because once you bring in those words, all of a sudden people are on the defensive and they're going to self-censor what they say to you because of how they could be judged. And so when we don't use those words, instead of saying, you know, you've perpetrated sexual harm because you didn't ask for permission, if instead we say, well, how did you know your partner wanted that act? That's when we all of a sudden have men bragging about their experiences to us, proudly talking about them in great detail because they see them as sexual conquests. Look at how I have convince this attractive person to have a sexual activity with me. And so one of the most important things to consider when interacting with people who you might consider to be a criminal or an offender of sexual harm is they often don't see it that way. And they often have what they consider to be very legitimate reasons why they engaged in the behavior that they did.
Interesting. So, Laura, do you think video dating is a step forward, metaverse dating, or a step away from it?
I think it's just not going that fast in that direction of metaverse dating because it might, yeah, like I said before, it might make sense that this would be one of the next step. But at the end of the day, it's all about what do people like to use and how many people use it. Like, is it going to be a thing that is just normal to do? And even with video dating, that's not the case right now. At the moment, it's normal to use swiping dating apps, and maybe this will change in a few years again, and maybe not. It's just for us. I don't think that it is in the same direction. It's not towards and it's not back to it, but it's in a different space, because what we are actually trying to do is getting a more authentic impression of someone. Like, we're even more real than a picture, you know, like you get the live video of someone and not a maybe edited picture. And also in the metaverse, there is like a lot of things that you can do with avatars and stuff like that, which is cool, but it goes in another direction. And what we're actually trying to do is make it more raw in a way of like getting back to, hey, this is just you and you would like to meet other people, and it's not about putting yourself out there in a perfect profile to get some attention. So I would say it's on a just on a completely different road, and it's not going back or forth to it.
Interesting. We have about 3 minutes to take some questions from the audience, so let me just quickly read through that. And there is a very interesting question addressed to Douglas, and I think they're asking, how are the courts handling these cases of sexual harassment in the metaverse? Is there any existing, court case we can talk about?
Yeah, actually, Pin later in the Q&A answers that question, acknowledging in much better detail than I could right now verbally at how far behind the laws are with this, as Pin points out in their message. A lot of legislation requires that physical bodily harm occur. And so when we consider experiences of virtual sexual harassment or assault in VR, while they might feel just as real to the victim, a lot of legislation does not recognize that as a crime. So I'd say we're currently very behind in legislation that recognizes these harms, and also solutions to helping victims recognize these experiences as harmful and as criminal.
I'll echo that in the sense that there's a lot of gaps there in terms of legal jurisdiction, and law has to catch up in most jurisdictions. And this is one of the major issues, because some of the harms which are there, existing and potential harms, are not criminalized. And that causes a lot of issues in terms of investigation and prosecution.
Interesting. Laura, do you have any comments?
No, I that's very much true, and super important to trigger that.
Yeah. There is another question which I find really interesting, is they're asking, which are the main standards that can be utilized for regulations because of complexity to determine jurisdiction? So I don't know if any speakers would like to answer that question, because it sounds very difficult. Yeah.
Well, I can very briefly give a comment there. So I'm not a legal scholar by any means, but something that we've been doing in Michigan just this week, we were updating legal regulations around the reporting and care of sexual assault survivors. One of the most important things is to involve experts who have a deep understanding of sexual harm, how it occurs, and what constitutes harm, such as sexual assault nurse examiners and other professionals that deal with survivors of domestic and sexual violence.
Interesting. Yeah. There is a question for Laura. So have you got many successful love stories from your app? And what's the main difference of your app from existing dating apps that are commercialized these days?
Yeah, we have many love stories. This is the greatest part about my job. So absolutely love it when people get together. So we do have that. And I mean, what's really the difference is what I mentioned in the beginning, that much more people end up in a real date. Like the conversion rate from a match to a date is much higher. So I think that is actually the real difference. And when it comes to technology, the difference is that we are focusing only on live video dating. So it's not like an add-on feature. Like, I mean, you can do video calls on Tinder as well if you want to. But what we're trying to do is focusing on that completely, and like skipping the part of swiping and chatting, which at the moment for most of dating apps, this is the way to go. You swipe profiles, you chat to each other, and then you kind of take it from there. And we completely skip that part, and we match people on video dates. And maybe when it comes, I mean, the security part is huge on our side as well. It's a huge challenge because you get to meet someone right in the beginning in a video, and you can do fortunately, you can do a lot of things technology-wise as well already, kind of. You can There are many things that you can implement to prevent like sexual assault or misuse of the platform. But mainly, and maybe this is something that also the other speakers have a take on, we try to prevent it from the very beginning to get those people on the platform. So for example, verification, getting like personal data from the users is something that prevents, or and in our case, we hope that this prevents misuse then in the first place, because they're like, okay, they have my personal data. I needed to verify I needed to upload my ID card or my passport. So it's easier also if someone is misusing the platform that you can actually target that person and you know exactly who did it, which I do think at the moment is lacking. That's like they're getting on with verification on dating apps, but it's still like super normal that there are fake profiles on it, that you don't know who is actually behind that profile.
Thank you. So I want to say a massive thanks to every single one of our amazing speakers for your useful insight. I'll hand over to Yilin Zhao at ITU. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I would like to take this opportunity also thanks our distinguished panelists for taking us through these exciting discussions, which we believe will be the cornerstone for future standards work on this topic. Before we conclude this webinar, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Xin He to deliver the closing remark for today's webinar. Dr. Xin is the Vice Chair of ITU Focus Group on Metaverse, and she is also a standardization professional specialist at Nokia. Xin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yilin, and to distinguished guests, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. As we draw this unique webinar to a close, I'd like to thank everyone for your active participation and insightful contribution to our discussion on the future of real love in the virtual world. In this era of digital transformation, it is clear that technology has dramatically changed the way we connect, communicate, and form relationships. It has also woven itself into a very fabric of our social lives, and as we have seen today, even our romantic lives. Throughout this session, we look at the role of online dating, social media, and emerging metaverse in reshaping the dating landscape. I want to thank all the participants for your open dialogue about the challenges that come with this advancement. It is important that we continue to reflect on issues surrounding privacy, data authentication, and so-called digital divide. As we move forward, those are the areas that definitely require our attention and actions. As we conclude, I hope that we take away not just the knowledge that's shared here, but also the understanding that despite the digital medium, the core of dating and relationships remains the same. And I mean, the real connection. It doesn't matter in the real world or virtual world, and mutual respect and shared experiences. In this area, ITU remains a crucial partner for government, industry, civil society, and academia in providing an open, collaborative platform to discuss these important issues. I would like to invite you to follow the discussion on Metaverse taking places within ITU Focus Group on Metaverse. Our next Focus Group meeting will take place on 5th and to 8th March 2024, which preceded by a forum on Cityverse. That will take place one day before the meeting, which is the 4th of March, in Querétaro, Mexico. ITU colleague will put the link in the chat for this forum meetings. I think it's also allowed us to join remotely. And finally, I would like to extend my sincerest gratitude to all our speakers and the participants for sharing your expertise, insights, and experience in this fascinating exploration of love in the digital age. As we continue to navigating our digital transformation journey, I would encourage all of you to visit ITU's, we call it Digital Transformation Dialogue website, and register for future events to continue this conversation. Thank you all, and I hope to see you again at next ITU event. Now I hand over to Ying. Ying, please.
Thank you, Xin. Dear colleagues, our digital transformation dialogues will continue to hold sessions. Don't miss the upcoming Ask the Expert session on Urban Intelligence Unveiled, AI Principles for Smart Cities, scheduled for 21st February 2024. My colleagues will provide the link in the chat. Thank you all for your participation, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day ahead.